heard it said that time is money.
No doubt that's true. But what is also true is that unless we learn to manage both time and money, a successful and happy life will be difficult to achieve.
Today's guest is going to help us to learn better to manage these two precious resources as a means to improving our marriage. I'm Mike Tucker.
And I'm Gail Tucker. Welcome to Lifestyle Magazine's Mad About Marriage.
We're glad to have you with us on this edition of Mad About Marriage, Lifestyle Magazine series on how to meet the challenges of marriage in today's crazy world. Our special guest today has practical advice on how to fit all the important and essential things you need to do, including sleep, into your busy life. Laura Vanderkam is a popular author and journalist whose work has been widely published in places like USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, Scientific American, and Reader's Digest. Her latest book is titled 168 Hours. You have more time than you think. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. We're glad that you've come to be with us, and this is a topic we all need.
Yeah.
Because I definitely don't have enough time in the day.
Exactly. Well, some people think they have enough money, but no one seems to have enough time.
That's true. That is true. Yeah. Now, you used 168 hours to title this book, and as the basic unit. Why?
Well, there are 168 hours in a week. People say 24/7. No one ever multiplies it through.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, but there's 168 hours. And I think that's a better way to look at our time. Because in any given day, we might not achieve the right balance, right? We might have to work late, or something could go wrong on the way to work. You know, there could be a family issue. Maybe we won't get to exercise every day, for instance.
Yeah, tell me.
But in the whole of 168 hours, I think we can find time for anything that really matters to us.
So if we look at our life by the week, it seems to help us?
It does. Because, you know, what happens with a lot of parents, you know, if you're saying, well, I can't every day have this great quality time with my children, or I can't spend, you know, every night talking with my spouse, but maybe you could 3 or 4 times a week, right? That's certainly better than nothing. And I think when we look at 24 hours and say, well, I can't do it every day, it puts a lot of pressure on us. But in the course of 168 hours, there's enough time.
Yeah, this is what I can accomplish this week.
That's right.
And I think when you look back, it helps too. This week I did such and such.
And often, you know, you can get to more in a week than you think you can.
You use the term core competencies. What do you mean by that?
Well, core competencies is a phrase from the business literature, which basically means things that we do best and that other people cannot do nearly as well. So different businesses have things that they do best, and that's what we know them for. But the point I raised in 168 hours is that people have core competencies too. And they're different for all of us, but broadly they tend to fit into 3 categories, and that is nurturing your career, nurturing your family, and nurturing yourself. So those are the 3 things that you do best and that other people cannot do nearly as well. And I think that when we focus our time predominantly on those 3 activities, we can't help but be very effective.
I like that. But, you know, even for me, as I think about that, there's certain things that I don't do well, that I don't enjoy doing. And if I can find another way to accomplish those, one of those things is I'm the world's worst handyman. For me to waste time trying to fix something is absolutely a waste of my time and my energy and frustrates me. That's a part of what you're talking about?
Exactly. If something is not a core competency, then you should either ignore it, minimize it, or outsource it. So you could always ignore it. Maybe the sink will flood if you do.
You've been to my house.
Yes, but or you can outsource it to somebody who perhaps their core competency is fixing the sink. That's what they do professionally. And in economics, we know that things work most efficiently when everyone focuses on their core competencies, and that does in human relations as well, even if that seems a little funny to think about.
Well, talk about human relations. Let's talk about our marriages. How does all this fit into our marriage? How does it affect it?
Well, marriage is a very important thing to spend time on. That is one of our core competencies. You certainly hope that no one else can be the spouse to your spouse that you can.
Right.
You certainly hope not.
Yeah, exactly.
But, in the course of our busy lives, as we're building our careers, as we're raising our families, often our spouse is about the last person on the list.
Isn't that the truth?
It's such the truth, because there's always something else that's clamoring for attention.
Yes.
There might be a work deadline, or even if you've managed to break away from work, your kids have something going on. And especially many two-income couples, it's always, they want to spend every time that they're not at work with the kids. And that's an understandable impulse. But the problem is that if there's no time invested in the marriage, then it all falls apart. So that's really something that we have to actively put on our calendars, because if we wait for the time to appear, something else will always happen instead.
I've got to schedule my wife into my calendar.
You do, and it sounds so unromantic, but part of...
They don't write songs about
yes,
that,
no, scheduling my wife on the calendar, it doesn't make a good country song. But the thing is, when you do this, then you know it's coming, you can anticipate it. There's a lot of joy and anticipation and thinking, I'm going to have this special time with my spouse coming up. You can look forward to it, make plans so nothing will go wrong and keep you from doing it.
That's right.
I think it tangibly says, I'm a priority to you.
It does.
I'm a priority to Mike, or he's a priority to me if I'm willing to actually put him on my calendar.
And
block out the time.
That is so true, because one of the great phrases I learned when I interviewed tons of people who do a lot with their time for 168 hours. One woman who had an exceptionally busy life, running a business, raising 6 children. I mean, really crazy. What she told me is she never says, I don't say I don't have time to do X, Y, and Z. What I say is I don't do X, Y, and Z because it's not a priority. And often that is a perfectly adequate explanation. There are many things that I don't do that are not priorities. But when you say you don't have time for your spouse, that's really saying that your spouse is not a priority.
It is.
That's well put.
Wow.
Well, here's another priority. We have to take a break. We're going to do that right now. We'll be back in just a moment. You hang in there.
We're back with author Laura Vanderkam talking about her book, 168 Hours. And that's how many hours we have in a week to accomplish what we need to accomplish. But we're talking about marriage, and in a marriage, in a home, there are all kinds of things that have to be accomplished.
Very true.
I mean, there's the house cleaning and all that. What about people that say, I don't have the money to hire someone to come in and do those things, and yet my time is just too busy? What do you say to that person?
Well, whenever there's something that we don't want on our plates, we have 3 choices we were talking about before. We can ignore it, we can minimize it, or we can outsource it. So with something like housework, you can outsource it, but it doesn't cost anything to lower your standards, right? So, if you've got little kids and they make a mess of your house, you can spend time cleaning it up, but they will just make it messy again.
It's going to happen.
So you could say, well, instead of picking it up after they go to bed, I'm going to take that time to talk with my spouse and to really interact with each other and just maybe let the dust sit.
There really, truly is something to that. I had a friend who had little children, and she said she spent every day just following them around, picking stuff up and putting it away, and they made this mess. And she said, I finally realized that I wasn't spending any time with my children. And so she said, I decided I will pick it up once a day after they've gone to bed.
That sounds like a lot more fun.
It does.
And I probably don't even pick up after they go to bed.
Yeah, but I didn't either.
I mean, when you have a choice, you can, when you're at home, you can spend lots of time cleaning, or you can use that time to actually interact with your family. One of those is a core competency, the other is not. So you should focus on the thing that is.
Wow.
the thing that really matters.
The thing
Yeah.
that matters. And, you know, the children are little once. The house can always get messy again.
That's
so,
right.
So
That's
focus
right.
on the kids.
I like that focus, I do.
So if we're a little obsessive about keeping the house clean, maybe we need to think about what is really important in our lives instead.
Exactly. And probably you're not going to think about how much clutter there was on the floor years hence.
No,
You're going to
you're really
remember
not.
those moments of playing with your children.
That's right. That is what you will remember and what they will remember.
What they will remember
as
too.
well. It will make a
Very
difference
few
in their
people,
lives.
I mean, people have good memories of eating together, maybe cooking together.
Yes.
Very few people think, wow, I have great memories of Mom always folding laundry.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well put. Well put.
Good point.
All right, let's say that I'm going to do a complete makeover of my 168 hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I start?
Well, the first step to figuring out how to spend your time better is to figure out how you're spending it now. Most of us have absolutely no idea how we're spending our 168 hours. We overestimate how many hours we're doing work or housework. We underestimate how much we sleep, for instance. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can just write down what you're doing. Keep a time log. You know, if people have tried to lose weight, you keep a food journal, writing down what you're eating so you don't eat mindlessly. And it's the same thing with time. Write down how you're spending your time. Write down how you're spending that 168 hours. Add it up in different categories and ask yourself, does this reflect my priorities? And maybe it does, and that's great. But if it doesn't, then you can say, well, what would I like to get off my plate, right? What's not a core competency? What could I ignore, minimize, or outsource? And then you can also look at your calendar and say, well, what would I like to have in there? What high-impact activities could I put in my 168
It's
hours?
not there right now.
That's not there right now. What would I like to have more of in my life? Because that's just as important a question.
It is.
Many of us try and change our schedules to save 5 minutes here and there without asking, what are we saving that time for?
Yeah.
What do we want to be doing with our 168 hours? So that's a very important question to
So
ask
first
yourself.
is analyze.
Analyze.
Analyze it.
Analyze. Use the data and then ask what you want to be doing and make sure you put that in.
Now, has anyone ever criticized you saying this is way too regimented? You are minimizing the joy of spontaneity?
I do get that, and I
surely.
have an answer.
Okay.
Well, that's good to know.
Which is that, I mean, someone like me, I work pretty much full time. I have 2 little kids, running a house as well.
Yeah.
If I want to do something, it has to be scheduled in. Because if I want to, say, lie on the grass and daydream, if there's not a time for that in the calendar, it
doesn't
won't
happen.
happen. And even if you don't have many things on your plate, we live in an electronic age, you know, where people can turn on the TV, right? We can check our email. And that's what we tend to do when we have free time, rather than something that might be more enjoyable. So unfortunately, if you want to be spontaneous, you really have to schedule open time and then say,
Schedule your
okay, well, now I'll
spontaneity.
do what I want
2
during
o'clock,
this time.
spontaneity.
But this is my blocked off time where I'm going to just do something for myself.
Well, some people would just call it me time.
Me
I'm just
time,
going to
yeah.
schedule me time.
Yeah.
I'm going to schedule me time. And you don't have to say what you're going to do during it.
No,
but,
right.
but
because
if-
that can be spontaneous.
That can be spontaneous. But really, with the demands of modern life and all the distractions that can expand to fill the available space, you have to schedule it in.
It's true.
That is a reality of life. But scheduling your wife in, scheduling your husband in, even though that may seem somewhat regimented, isn't it nice to know that you matter enough to warrant that time?
Absolutely.
I think there's great freedom in setting these strict times on our schedule. I mean,
Yeah.
just because you know it's going to happen then, right? And then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we want to talk about scheduling our money and managing that as well.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've got some excellent advice on that.
My point more is that time and money are both choices, right? And so especially when it comes to something like marriage, we often think that we don't have the time or money to invest in our marriage, and particularly if you have kids that are very expensive as well.
Exactly.
What is that?
They are.
That is true. But time and money are choices. And so one of the things I like to ask people is, well, if you don't have money for a babysitter later in life, think about it. What did you spend on your wedding? What did you spend on your engagement ring? What did you spend on wedding flowers, right? The average couple spends about $1,200 on flowers for their wedding and then doesn't spend $1,200 on flowers for each other for the rest of their
That's a lot.
lives, right? The average engagement, the average couple spends, I think it was $5,250 on rings, right?
Wow.
And if you look at that in terms of $30 a night for a babysitter, that's 175 nights.
All right. So
Okay.
again, we're setting priorities,
You're setting
for the
priorities.
finances.
And
we want to talk more about that in just a
All
moment.
right.
We're going to take a break first. We'll be right back with more of our priorities right after this. We've been talking with Laura Vanderkam about time and money.
Two great things.
Two great things. Let's talk about money. Now, what do you think's driving this compulsion to spend all this money on rings and flowers for our wedding?
Well, partly it's just that society expects it, right? When we want to celebrate marriages, it's what we do. It's very expected. And certainly when I planned my wedding a few years ago, I found myself interested in things like Jordan almonds, which I had never crossed my mind before those months leading up to my wedding.
Sure.
And so you get caught up in this whole thing as opposed to saying, well, let me think about my marriage moving forward from here. There's a statistic in the wedding planning industry that it takes 250 hours to plan a wedding. I don't think many couples spend 250 hours planning their marriage.
Oh, that is
learning
well
how
put.
we're going to communicate when we have fights, thinking about how we want to raise our children.
Yes.
All these issues that will come up. They will come up.
Yeah.
And you'll have to deal with them, and we don't spend that time preparing for it.
And yet, we're not saying that the wedding day is not important.
No, of course not. I had a great wedding, and I'm wearing a ring, so I wouldn't be able to say, I was talking earlier about how much babysitting that a ring could buy. But these are choices, right? We have to recognize that they are choices. And so whenever we say, I don't have time for this, or I can't afford this, we have to examine, well, how have we spent our time? How have we spent our money? Are we spending those in ways that reflect how we want to be living?
So if someone is considering getting married, it might be good for them to take a step back and look at the big picture before they make the decision on how much they're going to spend on the wedding.
Yes, and say if maybe we can spend a little less on the wedding, when the marriage doesn't need a whole lot of help in the beginning, when you're still madly in love with each other.
Right.
But later on, if we have 2 kids, if we're both working very hard, what could that money do then to help us maintain a very good, strong marriage?
And really, we've started down this path of what else can we use that money for. What are some other options for using that money for?
Well, babysitting is a big one. A night out as a couple where you don't have kids crawling all over you. It's very important. Buying each other little bouquets of flowers, right?
Nice.
Just once every few weeks as a spontaneous way to say, I love you. We spend a ton of money on things like receptions, on food. Think about that. Well, maybe when things are getting very busy, a night of takeout might make a big difference. So that money that we spent on food at the reception, how much takeout could that buy later?
Yeah.
Or, the money you spend on dresses, that could pay for a laundry service for a while later. That for a long time. Maybe if there's a few weeks that are really tight and no one has time to do laundry, that's money that could be used to send it out. So those are choices.
Absolutely. And you just say, is it possible that we could back off a little bit on the wedding, not have the social event of the year, and put that money aside to use for something else that we might enjoy?
Yes, because the blowout wedding does not guarantee a great marriage, but little investments in the marriage over time just might.
And that's a good point. The blowout wedding, how does that relate to the actual
Well, I certainly don't think that
satisfaction?
there's a one-to-one correlation. The more dollars you spend on a wedding, the happier your marriage would be.
We seem to be acting that way,
We
though,
seem to
don't
be
we?
acting that way, and talking about the size of the ring as a size of the person's affection for you, and of course. Overall, maybe spending less than you could afford and setting up that money for later might be a better way to show affection.
So, again, it's a matter of making choices, changing our thinking about priorities, changing our thinking about what the status is, and doing something that's going to help us long term.
Exactly. And recognizing that time and money are choices, and we can choose how to spend both in a way that gives us the life we want.
That's excellent. And that's probably a good place to end our discussion. Thank you so much. We'll be back with a final word right after this.
most couples seem to be able to find plenty of things to fight about.
Boy, that's the truth.
But right at the top of that list tends to be finances.
That's right.
We tend to have lots of fighting, lots of disagreement over finances. But we have a tip for today, right?
Our tip is this: ruthlessly eliminate all debt. Now, when it comes to finances, we could talk about budgeting. We could talk about understanding the differences between wants and needs. We could talk about investments and savings. But really, tip number one has to be to get out of the debt trap.
Why is debt such a trap for us?
Debt, first of all, it increases the tension in the marriage. It raises the anxiety level, and it gives you something to fight about, and it reduces your area of flexibility. You don't have the opportunity to respond to an investment opportunity. You don't have the ability then to take the vacation you need. Sometimes even just purchasing the basic needs for life are difficult because you're spending so much time and resources on servicing debt.
So it seems like all of your resources tend to go into that black hole, that trap. And we get trapped into putting everything into just servicing the debt. We don't have any fun.
There's no fun. There's increased tension. It affects our ability to communicate with each other. It changes our attitudes about each other. And it just begins to destroy your life. It just saps the energy. And worst offender of all is credit card debt.
Absolutely.
Credit card debt will absolutely destroy you.
So our tip for the day: ruthlessly eliminate debt in your financial picture.
We've had a wonderful discussion today about time and money and how to manage both. And Laura, we thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It was a joy.
Great, great principles.
Yeah. And thank you for being a part of this one as well. We hope to see you again next week. But until then, you take care of yourself. Bye-bye.
Would you like to have a lasting and happy marriage? Learn some truths about solid relationships in the free Mad About Marriage book by Mike and Gail Tucker. Call today at 888-940-0062 or visit lifestyle.org to request your free book. That's 888-940-0062 or lifestyle.org. Ask for Mad About Marriage.